Hi guys, Zach here from BIMteriors, and we're back at it again with a new episode. And today we're talking about ceilings. Everything you need to know about ceilings, from how to place them, how to edit the assembly to make it the construction and the type of ceilings that you want to place, but also the types from generic flat ceilings to potentially adding a slope to that ceiling, or maybe we want to create arcs and organic shapes. And I'm going to go over today how to utilize those tools and how to get to that end finished result. So let's jump right into this week's episode on ceilings. Okay, so before we jump into creating our ceilings and editing our ceiling types, what I want to make sure that you have these ceiling views, these reflected ceiling plan views already created in your model. So on the project browser, you can see that I've got floor plans, 3D views, elevations, sections, and so on, but we're missing the reflected ceiling plan views. Now, we're going to jump into episodes later on going over how to create all types of views. So, for today's session, we'll just quickly go over this so that we have that view created for us to start creating and editing ceiling types. So, at the top of your ribbon in the View tab, you'll see that in the Create portion under Plan Views, when you drop this down, you have the options to create floor plans, reflected ceiling plans, plan regions, area plans. And so for today's video, we're going to select reflected ceiling plans. Now, when you select this, another window will pop up, and this will allow you to create a ceiling plan at that specific level. So keep in mind that you need levels created in your model to be able to actually create a plan view from. And so in this example, we're going to select level 2. And once you have the level selected that you want to create a view for, you're going to hit OK. So now in the project browser, I now can scroll down and see that we now have ceiling plan views created. And when I maximize that, I've got level 2, and it automatically jumps me into that view and that plan view we just created. So I'm going to scroll in, and at this point, I'm going to want to start drawing our ceilings. And so keep in mind that everything that we create in our model is in the architecture tab. So when I go over to your left side of the ribbon, find the architecture tab, select on it, and in the built portion, find the ceiling tool. Now, when you select on the ceiling tool, it's going to, in your properties, find the ceiling types that you have available to you in your project. So this is, again, the out of the box sample project for Revit. So in this case here, we've got a basic ceiling and a compound ceiling. And for this example, I'm gonna hit a compound ceiling. Now, the difference between them is a basic ceiling. Think about it as just a plane. Within your model, there's really nothing to it. There's no materials, there's no thickness. It's really just a plane that we can create a ceiling at. And then we've got compound ceilings. And these are where we can create different layers, different materials, and creating a thickness to them, constructing something that's more accurately going to be represented on site. And so in this case, I'll pick a compound ceiling, and you'll see that now the modify slash place ceiling tool is available to us. And there's two options within ceilings of how to place this within your view. We have automatic ceiling, which if I start to pan over any one of these rooms, it's going to find the room boundaries and start to place a ceiling within there at the designated height. So for example, if I was going to pick this bedroom, if I were to select this, it would place a ceiling at 2700. And so I can tell that by on the properties, I can see that I've got my ceiling type selected. My constraints are, it automatically knows that I'm in level 2 because I'm working on this plan of level 2, but this can be changed. So if this was coming from level 1, roof line, foundation, living room, whatever levels are in your project. So for this example, we're going to keep this at level 2, and we can then create a height. So potentially I'm going to change this to 2200, and I'm going to place this ceiling at 2200 in this bedroom. Now it's saying that none of the created elements are visible in your reflected ceiling plan, and this might be due to the visibility graphics, the view range. So I'm going to quickly check on this. And if you do get this message, it means that the elements that you've created are created below that cut range, potentially, or maybe it's hidden in your visibility graphics. But in this case here, I can see that in my view range, my cut plane is at 2300, and we put that ceiling at 2200, meaning that it falls below the cut plane and is not visible in the view. So what I'm going to do quickly is just change this to a set dimension that is below the elements that I'm creating so that they're visible from this view. And the best way I can put it is imagine that you're cutting at 1700, maybe that's shoulder width, shoulder height, and then you're looking up. So anything cutting at your shoulders is going to be represented in that view and looking up. So now that ceiling is there and I can select it, and I'm going to go to a section view so that I can see that where that ceiling is falling. And so potentially this is not where we want it, and we can change this at any time. We can change it using any of the modify tools from the align to the move, or you can change it within your properties as well. So if I came here and changed this value to 2400, you can see as I pan over, it's going to start to move up. But also keeping in mind, sometimes there's certain alignments that we want these ceilings. And in this case, I want that to be at the top of that mullion. So it's a nice finish from the window to our ceiling. And so I'm going to use the align tool to align this plane to the finished portion of my ceiling and do that. So now that height is at 2700. There's also the tool, so I'm going to delete this. Now when we go back to the architecture tab and we find our ceiling tool, we can select it, and I'm going to use the other option. So sometimes there's in our projects is maybe we've got cove lighting, maybe we've got a cool pop-up, and the automatic ceiling isn't the tool that we want to use. We can come to the sketch, and this allows us to sketch a completely customized ceiling to the extent that we want it. And it gives you the draw tools that we've gone over already, from drawing a lines, a rectangle to arcs and polylines. So I'm going to grab a line tool and start to kind of select a few constraints of the room. And in this case here, maybe I want to create a pop-up in the center of our room, and I'm going to grab another tool, and I'm going to grab a circular pop-up. So right now what we're doing is that when I select this, this is going to be the extent of our room, and it's going to go here, and it's allowing for us to either have a drop down or a pop-up, and we'll have to create another ceiling to do so. So I'm going to select, once I've got the boundaries created, I've got my design that where I think I'm going to want to pop it up created at a certain level height. And again, keeping in mind, we want this at 2700. And that was the value that aligned perfectly to our window in this scenario. And I'm going to hit the check mark mode to finish our created ceiling. So when I come here, and better yet, I'll create a 3D view. You can see that we're starting to create our ceiling, and we're starting to create it as aligning perfectly to our window. And we just need to finish it with going with another ceiling type with the pop-up. So I'm going to go back to our ceiling, and I'm going to want to create another ceiling within that area that is now void. It's still empty, and we want to fill it with another ceiling, but at a different height. So maybe it's popping down, maybe it's popping up. That's completely up to you and your design. So in this case here, going back to the architecture tab, finding the ceiling tool, going to keeping in mind the sketch ceiling, and you can even pick lines. So instead of trying to kind of eyeball it roughly, you can pick lines and select the ceiling, hit finish, and you'll see that that's great. It's working fine, but it's not at the height that we want it. We might want it to pop up an extra 200 mils, 300 mils, whatever that cove or that pop-up height is that we're trying to achieve. And so in this case here, I might make this 3000. So you can see that we're starting to create this design where we're starting to create multiple ceiling heights and different tools and different ways to be able to achieve that. So now that we know more about ceilings and the tools available to us to be able to create these ceilings, I wanted to, before we jump into looking at how to create slope ceilings or organic shapes, I wanted to dive into the assembly and how we can modify and change these. And it's a very similar workflow to what we've done in the previous episodes with walls and floors. And by selecting the ceiling itself and going to within the properties, the edit type icon, it'll bring you up to your type properties. And this is where within the type parameters, we can take a look at the structure of this ceiling assembly. And when I hit on edit type, it's going to bring up the actual assembly of this ceiling type. So in this case here, we know that there's a structure, whatever that may be, and it's got a certain material and thickness, and same with the finish. So in this case here, it's got a drywall gypsum finish at 15. And if I just scroll in to, or if you just look over to the right hand, you can start to see those layers as we're cutting through those. So for this example, I'm going to create a new ceiling type, go through that workflow so you feel comfortable being able to create certain ceiling types and assemblies for your project. So I'm going to hit cancel. And once we're in our type properties, the best thing to always keep in mind is to always duplicate, because if you start editing this specific ceiling type, you don't know where this potentially is in the project, and as you change this, it will change everywhere. So safest workflow is to always hit the duplicate option and name that accordingly. So for this example, I'll name this tile ceiling and hit OK. So now I've duplicated it. I've now got a new ceiling called tile ceiling, and I'm going to want to change the structure. And I'm going to go to the structure portion and hit the edit option. Now, when I hit the edit option, I've got the capabilities to introduce new layers, new materials, or edit the existing ones. And so for this example, we'll keep this super simple, is where potentially I'm only going to want to change the material of this finish from the drywall to a ceiling tile material. So under the material column, if you select on finish to, and then specifically the interior plasterboard, and in this little icon over here, select it, it's going to bring you to the material browser. And this is where you can look for any type of materials that potentially are suitable to the assembly that you're trying to create. Now, in this case here, the out of the box does not have it. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to potentially find a default material for us to select. And once we have that selected, we can then right click on that and we can duplicate the material and asset. And we're going to call this ceiling tile. Oops. Now, once we've done that, we've created our ceiling tile. We can then go over to the right side portion of our material browser, and under graphics, this is where we can start to put in more information. Does it have surface patterns? And potentially playing around with the alignments, the colors. And so in this case here, I'm going to add a grid system that's going to represent the ceiling tile that we've specified for our project. So I'm going to go into our patterns and I'm going to try to take a look at, is this already created for us? So I'm going to take a look and there might not be anything specific. And I'm going to go into model, and we went over this previously with using the Revit tool with a drafting pattern compared to a model. And keep in mind, a drafting pattern is something that is going to be very specific to your view scale. So if it goes from 1 to 50 to 1 to 100, that hatch pattern is going to adjust accordingly. Where model is going to be always true to that scale. It does not matter. It's true to that size. So in this case here, if we're picking a ceiling tile that is 600 by 600, no matter the scale, no matter the view, it's always going to be 600 by 600. And in this scenario, in this example, we're going to want to look in the model pattern types. So I'm going to keep scrolling down, and I don't see anything. I can see that there's some squares, but nothing that's specifically to our design and to what we're specifying for this project. So what we're going to have to do is create a new fill pattern. We're going to call this ceiling tile, and we might even want to go one step further and saying like, okay, it's a ceiling tile, but what's the size? And we're going to go 600 by 600, and this can be any size, just depends on what you're specifying, what you're designing for your project. This is where we could come across and we can do a crosshatch, and we can also do, again, changing the angles. So we might want it to be at 0. We're going to want to create a crosshatch, and this is where we can start to create and put in the value to whatever you're specifying. So for this example, our ceiling tiles are 600 by 600. I'm going to hit OK. And now we've created our new pattern that we want to apply to the new material that we just created. And again, making sure that we've got our ceiling tile selected. We have now created a surface pattern for this material. And maybe one step further, we want to have some fun with this. We want to select this, and maybe it's going to be a purple hatch pattern that we're applying to this ceiling tile. And I'm going to hit OK, and I'm going to hit OK. And lastly, I'm going to hit OK once more. So now you can see that we've started to create a pattern to this new ceiling. And if we go back to our view, you can see that we now have this 600 by 600 ceiling tile within our space. Now, the cool thing with using a model pattern is that alignment of these within the room is very important. And so sometimes it's centered equal, or you want more control. And when it's a modeled element, you can select on the line and actually move it, and it will move. Or you can use different modified tools, such as the align tool, to align certain start points of your grid. So in a certain part of the room, you might want that to be the start portion of your ceiling tile, and then go from there. So now that we have a better understanding of how to create ceilings, how to place them within our rooms, and editing different types and the structure and the materials and the thickness of these, we now want to kind of go one step further. And maybe we don't want ceilings at just a single plane. Maybe we want to add slope to them. And so right now I'm going to go through the brain freeze right now. I'm going to go through the workflows of how to create going from a generic flat plane surface to adding a slope to your ceilings. This can be done at the start of the creation of your ceiling assemblies or your ceiling design, or it can be done at any point. So in this example, I'm going to grab this circular pop-up that we created and add a slope to that. So when you have that selected, go to the edit the boundary. So when you go into edit the boundary, it allows you to potentially change the extent, the shape, whatever you want, but also under mode, there's a slope arrow option. And what that allows us to do is start to create an arrow and a direction of where we want to start and stop that slope. And so in this case here, we're going to start it here, we're going to drag it up here, and that's where we're going to want to stop it. And this will give us to where the severity of what that slope's going to be like. So if we started at 0, 0, and we go up to, in this case here, we'll enter a value of 450. Once you're done and you're happy with creating that slope, you can then hit the Finish Edit Mode button. Now, it might not look like anything has changed on your reflected ceiling plan, which makes sense. You're looking up. To be able to see that slope wouldn't necessarily show or depict on this view. If I go to another view that I've created, maybe my 3D, you can now see that we've added a slope to this portion of our ceiling where it pops up. Now, in our projects, we don't add bulkhead walls because they're not necessarily, because a lot of our ceiling details are based off drafting views and architectural ceiling details. Now, if you do want to add walls to this to finish that look and you are modeling to that extent, super easy. You can go to your wall tool, select on your wall, find the wall that you want, and you can do it from multiple views. I can do it from the 3D as well. And you might want to find your location line. So finish face, interior, and I'm going to use the pick line tool. So it's super easy from this view, and select where we want to start to create these walls. Now you can see it's creating it from whatever that base point is. So in this case here, level 2, and going up to a certain extent, where we might want to now edit these by selecting the walls and creating our base offset to that 2700. So now it's like that, but it's not extending to the proper way. Or if I extend it, it's getting me this weird detail. So what we want to do is select on the wall, and this is where you can attach base to the top of typically their roofs, but you can also use this same workflow with ceilings. So select on the attached top / base and select on your ceiling, and you can see it perfectly attaches it to the slope that your ceiling is going. And you can redo that workflow with this wall as well by selecting on the wall, going to the Modify tab, attach top base, and selecting on your ceiling. And you can see here, you're perfectly enclosing that. So when you do go to a section view, you're getting that proper section of what you're cutting through. So at this point, we've gone over how to create a basic ceiling from going from basic to adding slope. And now we're at a point where we want to create something unique, custom, organic that the Revit ceiling tool is giving actually a hard time to create. It's very hard to kind of create these shapes, and it's not allowing us to do it as the design that we had envisioned. So how do we create that, and how do we bring that into our drawings? So under the architecture tab, instead of going to your ceiling icon, what you can do is go under components. So when you have, oh, and we're frozen, 1 second. So once you are in your components, we're still frozen. There we go. Live sessions, it happens. So when you have components selected, you can see, well, you've got your components here. However, go back to the architecture tab, drop that down. There's a model in place option. And what this allows us to do is now model anything that we want in this view using, now making sure that we find the ceiling category. So now what that's going to do is we can now create a ceiling to whatever shape we want using this tool with the model in place. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to call this, we can call this ceiling 1. Why not? Hit OK. So it's going to ask us to start to create this extrusion. So it's going to ask us to pick a plane. So what we want to do is either you can find a reference name, select the reference that you're going to want to create this from, or you can pick a plane. And so I'm going to pick a plane for this example, and I'm going to want to hit a plane of where I'm going to want to create this profile so that I could extrude throughout the room. So I'm going to hit this as my plane to work with. And then my draw tools come up. So I might want to scroll into here and start to kind of create some fun shapes. So I'm going to draw a line. Maybe we go and create a few arcs. And really start to have some fun with creating something organic for our project. And maybe what I'll do is I'll cap it here. I'll come back to our ceiling and I'll finish it like this. So maybe we want to start to create a ceiling that's going to have this profile from one end to a room to another, or certain extents, completely up to you. Now, once you have your sketch complete and the loops are fully closed, remember that this has to be fully closed for this to work. I'm going to hit finish edit mode, and I'm going to then hit finish mode. So now we've created up this ceiling in our space. And I'm going to just bring out these extents so that we can see this ceiling. And you have grips on this as well. So if this does not go the whole way of the room, you can see that you have control to actually play around with how far this goes within your room. And the other great thing about this as well is that when placing light fixtures, because it is a ceiling, it will actually host to the ceiling as well. That's a wrap on this week's episode of ceilings. Now, hopefully you learned something new with if it's placing a ceiling or if it was editing the ceiling assembly to make it more suitable to the ceiling types that you were creating in your project, or if it was going from creating a flat ceiling to a slope ceiling to creating organic shapes. Hopefully you're able to kind of utilize something in today's episode and start applying it to your projects. If you're hearing this message, it means that you've listened to the new video all the way to the end. And for that, I thank you. Please like and subscribe now to gain access to new Revit content weekly.